Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A gute Woche and a freilichen Chanukah. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. Being that it's Chanukah, we'll begin with a Chassidus thought on Chanukah, and then continue where we are up to in Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it's in honor and memory of Rav Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Shalom, Rav Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Shalom, Rabbi Yoel HaKohen Khan Olav Shalom. It's in schus and merit of Rav Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz La'erich Yomim V'Shanim Tevis for many long, healthy years. So, Chanukah, of course, Festival of Lights. My Chanukah, says the Gemara, what happened on Chanukah was that after all the Shmonim Shebehechel, Timu Kol HaShmonim Shebehechel, the Yevonim, the Greco-Syrians, they contaminated and defiled all the oil in the Beis HaMikdash. Then the miracle happened that after they re-entered into the Beis HaMikdash, the Yidden, they discovered one cruse of oil that was untouched. And they lit the menorah, and the second miracle was that even though it was only enough oil to burn for one day, it burned for 8 days until they were able to produce new oil. And that's Chanukah. So the obvious question that's asked is, that was only possible, this miracle of the oil, because there was a war that was fought. A war with the Yevonim, with the Greeks and the Greco-Syrians. The Seleucid Empire that had defiled the Beis HaMikdash and was trying to suppress the Yidden, had passed many gzeiros that forbade circumcision, Shabbos, other mitzvahs, and the Maccabees fought a war. And because they won the war, that was why they were able to re-enter the Beis HaMikdash and rededicate it, Chanukah, from the word Chanukah. So it's Chanukah HaMizbeach, the rededication of the temple, of the Mizbeach, of the altar, and of the menorah. So seemingly the lighting of the menorah was a secondary element, just like in general the service in the Beis HaMikdash. So why is the focus, my Chanukah, on lighting the menorah? It should have been on the victory of war, the victory over the enemies. That's the question that's asked by commentaries, and Chassidus talks about this. We do mention in Al Anisim, we do mention the Milchama, Giberim biyad ma'atim, Rabim ba'ad, Giberim biyad chaloshim, I should say, Rabim biyad ma'atim, but still the focus is on Aneres Halolo, on lighting the candles. So the answer given is because the Milchama, Chanukah, was a Milchama Ruchnis. It was a Milchama around light, around Ner Mitzvah V'Terer. The Yevonim, the Greeks, the Greco-Syrians, did not want to kill the Jews. They did kill Jews because the Jews defied them. But didn't want to kill the Jews per se, like Haman did on Purim, the miracle of Purim. As the Levush explains, that Purim we celebrate primarily through Gashmizdika things. Asuda, Shalach Monas, food, Matanas Lavyenim, because there was a gzeira against the guf of Yidden. Chanukah was a gzeira against the neshama. Like we say, La'ashkichem teiresecha u'lavirim mechuke retzenecha. They had no problem with Torah as a book of wisdom, of philosophy, of ideas. But teiresecha, why are you making it holy? It's God's Torah. They had no problem with the moral, ethical laws of mitzvahs. But why chuke retzenecha? God's mitzvahs. Asher kedeshanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu. So the war was against the light, against the ruach, the spirit, which is indicated in the ner mitzvah v'tere'er, the light of Yiddishkeit. That was the very teichen of the Milchama. So it's not a secondary aspect, the menorah. When the Shmonim, the oils were defiled, it represented that the purity of Kedushas HaBeis HaMikdash and Kedusha of Torah mitzvahs was desecrated. Because that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to desecrate, don't make it holy. It's human intelligence. It's human morality. That was their battle. So when the victory came, it was a victory over the Ruchnius and over the lights. And that's why we celebrate it through light, because the Milchama itself is about light. So light represents not just the light that illuminates darkness, light represents Kedusha, holiness. And that's indeed the mitzvah of Chanukah. So when we celebrate Chanukah, we're celebrating the Neshama of Torah, and Takashemen and Zayis are all examples for Nishmosa Daraisa. Shemen Shabbat is called the oil of Torah, like Primis Torah, especially, is like the oil that's concealed within the Zayis, within the olive. And when we learn Torah, we're drawing forth that pure Shemen Zayis Zoch, the pure olive oil. And light is not just that we do mitzvahs and we learn Torah, but we do it with a light, with a candle. Ner mitzvah v'Torah er. And it's Ner Hashem nishmas adam. So you do everything with a chayis, with an inner vitality, and with a higher gedusha, a sanctity. So therefore, all the mitzvahs and Torah is all God's Torah. That's what we're celebrating on Chanukah. And that was indeed exactly the essence of the whole Milchama. Another point is that when you are celebrating that level of Torah, it's not just that Torah Er, mitzvah and Torah Er, it's also a power to illuminate darkness. Because here comes another question. Since the whole Chanukah Meneder, and the lighting of Chanukah, the Neder's Chanukah, is to remember the rededication of the Meneder and the Beis HaMikdash. The Meneder and the Beis HaMikdash had many differences from Chanukah. A few of them. The Meneder and the Beis HaMikdash has 7 branches. Chanukah Licht is 8 branches, 8 days. The Meneder and the Beis HaMikdash was lit in the morning. There's also Bein Arbaim. Chanukah is Dafka lit in the evening. Mishatishka Achama, when the sun sets. The Meneder and the Beis HaMikdash was lit indoors, inside the Beis HaMikdash. Chanukah al Pesach Beis HaMibachutz, by the door facing outward. So why these distinctions? Because the difference is between two types of light. You can have a light of Torah mitzvahs in good times, and it illuminates. It brings Kedusha, the Elokus, godliness into this world. But then there's a light that comes after there's a concealment, after there's a gzeda, after there's a decree, after there's a challenge, a setback, as the lights of Chanukah. So there we need a deeper light. Of course it originates from the Meneder, but now you're revealing a deeper form of light. And indeed, that's what we see. What Chanukah showed was that even when there's no shemen, no pure olive oil, and even in a state of darkness, spiritual darkness, we still find even one small spark, cruse of oil, pach shemen. And that burns for 8 days. That means that no darkness can, darkness does not conceal. So it reveals a deeper level of light. Yisur na'er min ha'cheshach, the power of light that comes through darkness is deeper than the light that shines in a regular situation. So all these elements that changes is exactly that. We light by night because the whole point is to illuminate the darkness. We light al Pesach Beis HaMibachutz because the point is to illuminate the chutz, the outside of the Dal Lamas of Kedusha, of the home, of the Beis HaMikdash. And we light 8, not 7, as the Rashba writes. The difference between 7 and 8, 7 is a hekef. It's the cycle of Kedusha, 7 days a week, 7 years of the Shemitah, 7 midas. 8 is Shemer HaHekef, represents transcendence. Lamnatzeich ala Shminis, like Bris Milah. It's a higher level of Kedusha from what Lashon Chassidus, from Sevav Kalam. Not just Mamala Kalam, not just the divine energy that manifests in existence, but the divine that transcends existence. And this also explains another thing. The Ramban writes in the beginning of Parashat Ba'alei Leischa about Chanukah. Interesting thing. the natives of the Beis Hamikdash, ultimately the Beis Hamikdash would be destroyed, God forbid. Rahman al-Islam. And also the Ner Tamid, even though it was called Ner Tamid, an eternal flame, it was extinguished. Haneres Halolu, however, says the Ramban, the natives of Chanukah, Einam P'telin Le'elam. They never get extinguished. Throughout the years of Golus, we continue to light the natives Chanukah. Why? Because a light that comes after darkness is a light that can't be extinguished. Like the halacha, Shtar Sheyotza Lo V'Irer, a contract that was challenged and then it's upheld can no longer be challenged. Because till there was no darkness, there was no concealment, no challenge, you don't know how you would withstand, would you be able to withstand? Think of a powerful tree or a powerful ship. Can it withstand a storm? Once you see a storm has come and it continues to stand strong, then you know that nothing can destroy it. And that's why the Chanukah lights burn throughout all the years in Golus until we were zeicha to the rebuilding of the third Beis Hamikdash, and then the menorah, of course, will be lit again. Adon Moshe Yimohem, with the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, a bayis nitzchi this time, because there'll be a bayis that comes after the darkness of Golus. But Chanukah has traveled with us through all the generations. It's a tremendous lesson in life that Chanukah represents the neshama of Yiddishkeit, ner mitzvah v'tere'er, ner Hashem nishmas adam, and represents nitzchis, eternity. Especially in our times, where sometimes there are, unfortunately, challenges. In Eretz Yisrael, Yidden around the world. So Chanukah reminds us of Am HaNitzchi, that the Yidden is like Ani Hashem le'shanisi b'nei Yisrael le'chalisam, that the Yidden will always be here and can always grow, and kasheyanese, in direct proportion to whatever challenge we have. Ken yirba v'chen yifretz, we thrive and we flourish. So just a few lessons from Chanukah, based on Chassidus, that explains what the meaning of Chanukah. Of course, there's so much more to talk about, but with that will suffice, and from that we'll move over to, indeed, Primius HaTeira, the Teira Shebiksav of Chassidus Tanya. And we're up to is close to the end of chapter 23, where we're indeed learning about Ner Mitzvah v'Teireh, mitzvahs, and then Teira. How both of them empower us to connect and manifest divinity, godliness, and divine unity. So after explaining the first part of the chapter about mitzvahs, Evarim the Malka, which are the limbs, the organs of the king, we're learning about Teira, Raisa v'Kudsha B'Richa Kulachad, how both mitzvahs and Teira even more so, don't have a hester upon him, that even though the neshama comes down below and the divine energy is concealed from us, but when we do a mitzvah, and even more so when we learn Teira, we are accessing and we're channeling Elokus Begili. Because it's Teira, it's not part of creation. It's godly wisdom and godly ratzon, without any tzimtzum. And it connects us, and we're united with it, with our higher garments of thought and speech. So Nefesh Elikis becomes united with the Teira, which in turn is united with Hashem. And with the highest levels, like we learned. Not just the divine energy that manifests in existence. And not just Sevav Kalama that remains so-called removed from existence because it can't manifest internally, but Teira is who he said, Ratzon Elyon, that is Sevav Kalam. And once we're aware of that's what learning Teira does, that when you're sitting with the Teira, it's not like anything else that you're engaging with. Even you're doing things that are kosher and proper and so on, but it still matters of the world. When you're learning Teira, you're accessing and uniting with that level of godliness. And because of that, he says, Mizeh yuchel hamaskil lahamshich. And because of that, we know therefore that Teira is greater than the mitzvahs, and even greater than tefillah, like he explained, and greater than el-gilu el-kus and el-misalyenim, because there, ultimately, it's still a limited gilui. And here you have, Teira is connected directly with the Ratzon and Chachma of the Eibishter. And then the Alter Rebbe says, So when you contemplate on this, you come away here with an applied lesson. That this idea can inspire a person a great sense of reverence. Yireh gdela, he says. Ba'aske b'Torah. As when he studies Torah. So we discussed last year more details of this, but let's go over it more in a little more depth. Say Yireh gdela, meaning it's not just Yireh. In general, there's the meaning of Yiras Hashem that a person has to always have. Yiras Hashem. It's the yesod of everything, like the Alter Rebbe will explain later in chapter 41. The Reishis Aveda v'Ikar v'Sharsha. Simply because if you don't have reverence and awe of God and reverence, what drives you to do mitzvahs? Why not follow your own whims? So Yirah is a yesod. But then there's a Yirah that's higher than that. Not just the idea of accountability to a higher power, to God, but there's a Yiras Harememus. You're in awe and reverence of the greatness of God. How God is completely beyond us. And compared to that level, we are completely like nothing. So it's even a higher level. And in that itself, the Alter Rebbe says that by learning Torah, a person can come to understand and contemplate that Torah brings him to a Yireh gdela. Why? So he continues, Kishi is beinen. When he contemplates, as we discussed. How the person's soul and his garments, in his mind and in his mouth, are completely and utterly merged, seamlessly, the total oneness with the divine will, because Torah is divine will. That's exactly God. It's God. It's essentially you're connecting to God's way of thinking, not just the thinking that is necessary. That's there, like the artist creating art, the author writing a book, the producers, the mind in the production. You're talking about God Himself, what exactly He really wants from all of existence. So it's not God in the effort and the wisdom of creation, it's God in the wisdom of Himself, what He actually wants. And that's what you're doing when you're learning Torah. And when the infinite divine light, so he's contemplating on that, and the infinite divine light, which is now revealed in his neshama and levushim, the soul and his garments. And what do you and you come to realize? So that alone, before we continue, that alone, once you realize when you're learning Torah, that's what's happening. Wow, that's an amazing thing. That brings a tremendous level of reverence, Yireh gdela. And then he goes further. So the first step was the yichud, that you're totally united now. When you're working lahavdil, you're doing work and you're investing as masra matam ba'amuna. So you also invested your seichel to do things in the right way, a business, successful business. You give tzedakah, you're mefarnes, you're supporting your family. All good things. But your mind is occupied in the affairs of the world. Here your mind and your whole being is occupied with the affairs of God. So you realize that, which is beinin, the maskos mizbeinin in that. That brings a tremendous element of reverence. But he goes further. And the two things. One is that miyuchad b'tachlis hayichud, that you're completely united. And also the Erein Sof Baruch Hu Mamash HaMizgala B'hem. You're also contemplating on the Erein Sof. So not only on the fact that you're connected with God's will, but the level is not the divine that's within existence. So there's 2 points here. So all that leads to a tremendous yirah. And that includes, that is barnus, mashakola elam esayim v'tachtein koloch shiva kameh kameyu ka'ayin v'efes mamash. So we're not talking about the divine that relates to existence. We're talking about the divine that's completely beyond existence. And that compared to that, all the worlds, the upper and lower, are considered null, or let's say considered ephes, like kilah, like nothing. And furthermore, are null and void, kaloch shiva kamei, uka'ayim ve'efes mamish, so several levels of bittul here, one higher than the next, to the point that that divine energy cannot manifest in existence. So again, one thing is that you're connecting, uniting with the divine, but not just with the regular divine that's beyond existence. That regular existence cannot manifest that. That divine level cannot manifest, b'teicha mamish, el kol b'b'chinas makiv. It has to remain removed. To give them their main life energy. Because Seviv is what gives them the main life. But what actually manifests with them, because it's a force that's outside of existence, that's beyond the Yesh and the Ayin, that's why it can create the Yesh. You need a power, a divine power that's beyond existence to create existence. But what actually manifests in existence is only a glimmer, only a reflection of light that actually becomes immersed in them. That which they're capable of containing without being completely annihilated or obliterated. So when a person contemplates on all of that, that brings him to a level of being elevated, and it's dafka through Torah. Now you could ask, why can't a person just contemplate on it without Torah? Because then it's a theoretical thing. The learning Torah, you're actually containing within you right now that divine level. But like he said before, loy chazi, we also, if we were able to completely, without unfiltered, we could also become obliterated just by that, because we're also neshamas begufim. But the fact is, even as souls inside the bodies, we have now Torah. So we know in our contemplation what we're dealing with here. So it's like when you're busy with the matters of the world, affairs of the world, it's a powerful thing. Because you're bringing godliness into the world. But when you do mitzvahs, and here we're talking further, when you're learning Torah, you're actually manifesting godliness inside of you. And you realize, wow, that's completely otherworldly. And that's what brings this higher level of Yirah Gdela. And now he continues. He says, V'zeu shekosov. This is what the pasuk says. V'yitzavenu Hashem es kol hachukim ha'elu liyirah es Hashem. This is a pasuk in Dvorim Veschanon 6:24 Vav Chav Daled, that God commanded us to keep to do these laws, all these laws, in order to revere God. Liyiras Hashem. So the obvious question that jumps out, as the Alter Rebbe says elsewhere, in Likutei Torah, I believe, he has the question. Actually, no, not the Alter Rebbe, it's Tzemach Tzedek. The L'cheira, the other way around, like we spoke earlier. In order to do mitzvahs, you need Yiras Hashem. That's why you begin with Yiras Hashem. Here he's saying that's the chukim that bring to Yiras Hashem. So he's explaining with what we just learned, because we're not talking about regular Yirah, we're talking about Yirah Gdela that comes through Torah. So he says like this now, that essentially, this is the level we're talking. It's called Kol Chukim Elim. We're talking about Torah now. The Torah, that when you're learning Torah, what does that bring you to? Liyiras Hashem, the higher level of Yirah. And that's obvious from what he says right afterwards as he continues. Because when you're learning Torah, like we said, you're united with the highest levels of Elikus. And that's what he continues in the brackets. Val Yirah Zu, Val Yirah Gdela Zu, So you see the words Yira Gedei Lezu. Amru, the Mishnah Novice, Gimel Yud Zayin, 3:17, chapter 3, Mishnah 17 says, Im ein Chochmah ein Yira. So we know the Mishnah says both things. There's ein Yira, ein Chochmah. And then it says im ein Chochmah ein Yira. So which one is it? Where do you begin? That's what I wanted to bring from the Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe asked the question, L'kutei Torah Masei, how do you begin? Seems like a catch-22. If there's no Yira, you don't have Chochmah. If you don't have Chochmah, you don't have Yira. The answer is there's two levels of Yira. There's a level of Yira that comes that comes from the Ein Yira, Ein Chochmah, that the level of Yira that precedes Chochmah. Reish is Chochmah Yiras Hashem. You could say that you need Yira to enter into the world of Chochmah, a certain element of bittul. But then there's a higher level. What he says, Ein Chochmah Ein Yira. If there's no Torah, there's no Yira. What Yira? The Yira Gdeila that we're talking about. And in that context, V'at Torah Nikras Etzlo Tara L'darta. And to this higher level of Yira, the Torah is called a gateway to the structure, to the dwelling. Tara L'darta. Like a shar l'bayis, to the dira. A shar l'dira. Why is it a gate? How could you call Torah a gate? Because Torah is leading you to that element of Yira that is such a high level. Commission is boyer, b'mokam acher. As explained elsewhere. The different commentaries on Tanya, they wonder what that elsewhere is. So there's different ways to explain it. Some say it's actually a Kesher Shem Tov, it's something from the Baal Shem Tov, even though Kesher Shem Tov wasn't printed yet, but the Alter Rebbe was very likely aware of the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. So what do you see from this? That the power of Torah, that Torah leads us to a state of higher consciousness and awareness. That's not possible without Torah, because it unites you with God's will and desire. You know essentially you're like in the inner chamber understanding God's purpose for existence, not just the wisdom in the structure of existence, and it's with the highest levels of the divine that existence itself cannot contain. But yet, it's still a maskil and it still requires a hizbonus. Remember, this whole section in Tanya is about karev elecha for everyone, even a person who is not capable to contemplate. So how do we deal with that? And that's Alter Rebbe going to be the conclusion, the last section of Tanya in chapter 23, and that we'll learn next week. Everyone have a freilich and Chanukah. This is TanyaApplied.com. You can go to and find all the previous programs. Gute Woche and a freilich and Chanukah.
This has been My Life Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChassidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.